The alien girl's heartfelt request, "Please be my father." Part 1. The colony on 4 was burning when the Starward Hope arrived. Commander Daniel stood on the bridge and watched the smoke rise from what had once been a peaceful farming settlement. 3 days had passed since the distress signal went out. 3 days of silence. He already knew what they would find, but he had to see it for himself. The ship landed on the outskirts of the destroyed colony. Daniel led the first search team personally. He walked through streets filled with rubble and ash. Houses had been torn apart. Fields had been scorched black. The raiders had taken everything of value and destroyed everything else. It was the kind of cruelty that made him question whether the galaxy would ever know peace. His crew searched for survivors throughout the day. They found none. The 2,000 who had lived here were all gone. Some had been killed in the attack. Others had been taken, probably to be sold as slaves in the outer systems. The few bodies they found told a story of desperate resistance against overwhelming force. Lieutenant walked beside Daniel as they moved through the last section of the colony. She was the ship's counselor and medical officer, a woman who had seen too much death in her career but still believed in finding hope. She said nothing as they passed another collapsed building. There was nothing to say. Daniel was about to call off the search when his scanner picked up a faint life sign. It came from beneath a destroyed storage building near the edge of the settlement. He held up his hand to stop the team and pointed at the rubble. His crew began to dig immediately. It took them an hour to clear enough debris to reach the underground shelter. The entrance had collapsed during the attack, sealing whoever was inside in complete darkness. Daniel squeezed through the narrow opening first, his flashlight cutting through the black air. The shelter was small, meant for storing emergency food supplies. Most of the containers had been crushed, but a small space remained intact in the far corner. That was where he found her. She was a young girl, no older than a human child of 8 or 9 years. Her skin was pale blue, the color of a winter sky. Large violet eyes stared at him from a face covered in dust and dried tears. 2 small antenna-like protrusions on her forehead lay flat against her head in fear. She was curled into a tight ball, her thin arms wrapped around her knees. Daniel stopped moving. He lowered himself slowly to the ground and set his flashlight aside so it would not blind her. The girl did not run. She did not scream. She simply stared at him with eyes that had seen too much. He spoke softly. He told her his name. He told her he was there to help. He told her she was safe now. The words felt small against the weight of what she had experienced, but he said them anyway. He had learned long ago that sometimes the smallest words carried the most meaning. The girl did not respond. She did not move. Daniel waited. Minutes passed. The rest of his team called down to ask if he needed help. He told them to stay back. He understood that this child had been alone in the dark for 3 days, surrounded by death and destruction. She had survived by hiding, by staying silent, by making herself as small as possible. She would not trust a crowd of strangers with loud voices and bright lights. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small protein bar. He had carried it for emergencies. He unwrapped it slowly and held it out toward her. The girl's eyes moved to the food, then back to his face. He saw hunger there, but also fear. She was trying to decide if he was safe. He placed the bar on the ground between them and pulled his hand back. Then he waited again. The girl watched him for a long time. Finally, she reached out with one trembling hand and took the food. She ate it quickly, desperately, like someone who had forgotten what it meant to be full. Daniel felt something twist in his chest as he watched her. When she finished, she looked at him again. This time, some of the fear had faded from her eyes. It had been replaced by exhaustion so deep that it seemed to reach into her very soul. Daniel held out his hand. He did not grab for her. He did not demand that she come with him. He simply offered and let her choose. The girl hesitated. Then slowly, she uncurled herself and placed her small blue hand in his. He lifted her gently and carried her out of the shelter. She weighed almost nothing. Her head rested against his shoulder, and he felt her whole body shaking with silent sobs. He held her and climbed out into the fading light of the dying day. His crew gathered around, but Daniel waved them back. He carried the girl all the way to the ship himself, walked beside him, her scanner running over the child to check for injuries. The girl was dehydrated and malnourished, but physically unharmed. The real damage was not something a scanner could measure. On the ship, Daniel took her to the medical bay. He tried to set her down on the examination table, but she clung to his uniform and would not let go. He looked at, and she nodded. He sat down on the edge of the table instead, the girl still in his arms. Worked around them, running tests and administering nutrients through a small device pressed against the girl's arm. The girl barely noticed. Her eyes had closed, and her breathing had grown steady. She had fallen asleep holding onto Daniel like he was the only solid thing in a universe that had crumbled around her. That night Daniel learned her name from the colony's damaged records. She was 9 years old. Her parents had been farmers. They had died defending the colony's children during the attack, had no aunts, no uncles, no grandparents. She was completely alone. Under law, orphans without family were sent to state institutions until they reached adulthood. The institutions were clean and efficient, but they were not homes. Daniel had seen them during diplomatic missions. They were places where children survived, not places where they lived. He sat in his quarters that night, unable to sleep. He thought about his wife, who had died 8 years ago in a shuttle accident. He thought about his daughter, Sophie, who had been only 5 years old when she died beside her mother. He had buried his heart with them and thrown himself into his work. He had commanded ships and led missions and earned respect throughout the fleet, but he had never felt whole again. Now a small blue girl slept in his medical bay, and something inside him had begun to wake up. He did not understand it. He was not sure he wanted to, but as the stars drifted past his window, he made a decision. He would check on her in the morning, just to make sure she was all right. It was a small thing, but small things, he had learned, were often the beginning of something much larger. The alien girl's heartfelt request, "Please be my father." Part 2. The journey to the nearest administrative center would take 3 weeks. Daniel told himself that was plenty of time for her to recover before she had to face whatever came next. He told himself that his only duty was to deliver her safely. He told himself many things during those first few days, but none of them felt true. Would not eat, she would not speak. She sat in the small guest quarters they had prepared for her and stared at the wall. The ship's medical staff tried everything they knew. They offered her foods from their stores. They played gentle music. They dimmed the lights to make her comfortable. Nothing worked. She was slipping away, retreating into a place inside herself where no one could reach her. Came to Daniel on the 4th day with worry written across her face. She told him that vital signs were weakening. The girl was not sick in any way that medicine could fix. She was simply giving up. Children who lost everything sometimes chose to follow their parents into the dark. It was rare, but it happened, and there was nothing a doctor could do to stop it. Daniel went to see her that evening. He did not bring food or medicine or promises. He brought only himself. He sat down in the chair beside her bed and said nothing, did not acknowledge him. She continued to stare at the wall with those large violet eyes that seemed to look through everything and see nothing. He sat with her for 2 hours. When he left, he told her he would come back tomorrow. He did, and the day after that, and the day after that. Each evening he came to her quarters and sat in the same chair. Sometimes he talked about small things. He told her about the stars they were passing. He explained how the ship's engines worked. He described the planets he had visited and the strange creatures he had seen. Other times he simply sat in silence and let her know that she was not alone. On the 6th day, something changed. Daniel was telling her about a planet covered entirely in flowers when he heard a small sound. He stopped talking and looked at. She had turned her head slightly. Her eyes were focused on him now, truly seeing him for the first time since the rescue. She opened her mouth and a single word came out. Her voice was rough from days of silence, barely more than a whisper. "Stay." Daniel felt his breath catch in his chest. He nodded slowly and settled back in his chair. He stayed with her until she fell asleep, and then he stayed a little longer. The next morning he brought her breakfast himself. It was a simple meal, soft bread and warm soup from the ship's kitchen. He set the tray on her bed and sat down to eat his own meal beside her. In culture, he had learned sharing food was how families bonded. Parents and children ate together as a sign of love and trust. Looked at the food. She looked at Daniel. Then slowly she picked up the spoon and began to eat. It was a small victory, but it felt like the greatest achievement of his career. He smiled at her, and for just a moment he thought he saw the corner of her mouth twitch upward in response. From that day forward, Daniel brought her every meal. They ate together in comfortable silence at first, then began to ask questions. Simple questions, spoken in broken English that she had learned from the ship's translation systems. She asked about the food. She asked about the ship. She asked about Daniel's life before he became a commander. He answered every question honestly. He told her about Earth, the planet where he was born. He told her about the ocean near his childhood home and the way the waves sounded at night. He told her about his parents who had passed away years ago, and eventually he told her about Sophie. He did not know why he shared that pain with her. Perhaps it was because she understood loss in a way that few others could. Perhaps it was because he had carried that weight alone for so long that it had begun to crush him. Whatever the reason, he found himself telling this small alien girl about the family he had lost and the hole they had left in his heart. Listened without interrupting. When he finished, she reached out and placed her small hand on his. The gesture was so simple and so kind that he had to look away to hide the tears in his eyes. The crew of the Starward Hope began to notice the change in their commander. He smiled more than he had in years. He laughed at jokes during meals. He seemed lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. They also noticed how followed him everywhere. She sat beside him on the bridge during his shifts. She walked with him through the corridors. She was never more than a few steps away. Watched this with mixed feelings. She was glad to see recovering. She was glad to see Daniel coming back to life. But she was also worried. In 2 weeks they would reach Hello's Prime, would be handed over to authorities. Daniel would have to say goodbye. She wondered if either of them would survive that separation. She tried to warn him one evening. She told him that he was becoming too attached. She reminded him that was not his daughter, that he could not keep her, that letting go would only be harder the longer he waited. Daniel listened to her words. Then he asked her a simple question. If it were you, could you let go? Had no answer. She watched him walk away and hoped that somehow things would work out. That night woke screaming from a nightmare. The sound echoed through the corridors, filled with terror and grief. Daniel was out of bed and running before he was fully awake. He reached her quarters in seconds and found her huddled in the corner, sobbing and shaking. He knelt beside her and gathered her into his arms. She clung to him with desperate strength, her small body trembling against his chest. He held her and rocked her and whispered that she was safe, that he was there, that nothing would hurt her. When her sobs finally quieted, she looked up at him with those violet eyes and spoke a word he did not understand. Who had followed him there, translated it quietly. The word meant protector father. It was what children called the parent who made them feel safe. Daniel looked down at. She was watching him, waiting to see how he would react. He realized in that moment that somewhere along the way, she had become more than a rescued child. She had become his daughter in every way that mattered. He kissed the top of her head and held her. I am not going anywhere, he told her, not ever. He meant it. He just did not know yet how hard he would have to fight to keep that promise. The alien girl's heartfelt request, please be my father. Part 3. The administrative station of Hello's Prime hung in space like a silver crown. It was beautiful in the cold way that government buildings often were. Daniel stood at the observation window and watched it grow larger as the Starward Hope approached. Beside him, gripped his hand so tightly that her knuckles had turned pale. She knew what was coming. They had talked about it during the final days of the journey. Daniel had tried to explain the situation gently, but there was no gentle way to tell a child that she might be taken away. Had listened in silence, her eyes growing darker with each word. When he finished, she had simply pressed closer to his side and said nothing. The docking procedures took an hour. Then a group of officials came aboard. They wore formal robes in shades of silver and blue, and their faces carried the practiced neutrality of bureaucrats. Their leader was a tall female named As, an ambassador assigned to handle cases involving non-species. She greeted Daniel with polite words that held no warmth. She was therefore. Daniel had prepared arguments, he had researched law, he had documented its recovery and the bond they had formed. None of it mattered. As listened to his words with patient disinterest, then explained the facts in simple terms. Law did not allow non to adopt children. The cultural differences were considered too significant. The biological needs were too specialized. It had never been done, and it would not be done now. Would be placed in a state institution until she reached maturity. She would be cared for. She would be educated. She would be safe. That was the best outcome the law allowed. When the officials moved toward, she screamed. The sound was raw and terrible, filled with fear that went beyond words. She backed away from them and ran to Daniel, throwing her arms around him and burying her face against his chest. Her whole body shook with sobs. Daniel held her and looked at As with hard eyes. He told her that he wanted a formal hearing to challenge the custody transfer. Law allowed anyone to request such a hearing when they believed an injustice was being done. He was exercising that right. I studied him for a long moment. Something flickered in her eyes, perhaps surprise or perhaps respect. She nodded slowly and said the hearing would be granted. It would take place in 3 days. Until then, would stay in a temporary care facility on the station. Daniel protested. He demanded that stay with him. Oz shook her head. The law required the child to be in custody during the proceedings. There were no exceptions. The officials took gently but firmly. She reached back toward Daniel as they led her away, her violet eyes filled with terror. He called out to her that he would come for her. He promised that he would not give up. He said everything he could think of to give her hope. Then she was gone, and he was alone. The next 3 days were the longest of his life. He spent every moment preparing for the hearing, helped him gather evidence of improvement under his care. The ship's computer generated reports showing her psychological progress. Other crew members volunteered to testify on his behalf. But Daniel knew that evidence might not be enough. He was fighting against centuries of tradition and law. He was asking to change their entire understanding of family. He was a human, an outsider, demanding the right to raise one of their children. On the night before the hearing, he visited in the care facility. She was in a small room with white walls and simple furniture. She looked smaller than he remembered, as if she had shrunk in the days since they parted. The light had faded from her eyes. He sat beside her on the narrow bed and took her hand. She leaned against him without speaking. For a while, they simply existed together in silence. Then looked up at him and he saw something change in her face. Fear was still there, but beneath it was something stronger: determination, hope, love. She spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. "Please be my father, I choose you." Daniel felt his heart crack open. He had spent 8 years building walls around himself, protecting himself from ever feeling such pain again. This small girl had walked right through those walls without even trying. She had made him feel things he thought were dead. She had made him want to live again. He told her about Sophie. He told her how losing his daughter had nearly destroyed him. He told her that he had sworn never to let himself love that deeply again because the risk of loss was too great. And then he told her that she had changed everything. She had reminded him that love was worth the risk. She had given him a reason to hope. Listen to every word. When he finished, she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small. It was a bracelet woven from colored threads, simple but beautiful. She told him that children made these for their parents. It was a bonding gift, a symbol of family that could never be broken. She had made it for him during the journey. She had been working on it in secret every night, hoping she would get the chance to give it to him. Daniel held the bracelet in his hands. It weighed almost nothing, but it felt like the most precious thing he had ever held. He slipped it onto his wrist and looked at his daughter. He called her his daughter out loud for the first time. The word felt right in a way nothing had felt right in years. He made her a promise. He told her that he would not abandon her. He told her that he would fight with everything he had. He told her that no law or tradition or government would keep them apart. Smiled. It was a small smile, fragile and uncertain, but it was real. She believed him. Tomorrow, he would stand before the council and fight for his family. Tonight, he held his daughter's hand and let himself believe that love could win. It had to. He could not lose another child. He would not survive it a second time. The alien girl's heartfelt request: "Please be my father." Part 4. The Grand Council Chamber of Hellos Prime was designed to make visitors feel small. The ceiling rose high above like the inside of a cathedral. Stone pillars carved with ancient symbols lined the walls. At the front of the room, 7 judges sat behind a curved table of polished wood. They wore robes of deep purple, and their faces were unreadable. Daniel stood alone in the center of the chamber. He wore his formal uniform, the one reserved for diplomatic occasions. The woven bracelet from was visible on his wrist. He had not removed it since she gave it to him. The gallery behind him was filled with observers. News of the hearing had spread quickly. A human trying to adopt a child was unprecedented. Some had come out of curiosity. Others had come to witness what they assumed would be a quick rejection. A few, Daniel hoped, had come because they believed in what he was fighting for. Ambassador Oz sat to the side of the judges. She would present the government's position. She rose when the chief judge called the hearing to order and began to speak in a calm, measured voice. She explained that law was clear. Children were the most precious resource of their civilization. They were protected by strict rules about care and upbringing. These rules existed because children had specific biological and cultural needs that only could properly understand. Allowing an outsider to raise a child would put that child at risk. She acknowledged that Commander had good intentions. She admitted that had shown improvement under his care. But intentions and temporary improvement were not enough. The law required certainty. The law required that children be raised by. She asked the council to deny the request and place in proper institutional care where her needs would be met. The chief judge nodded and turned to Daniel. He had one chance to make his case. Daniel did not speak about law. He did not cite regulations or precedents. He knew that he could not win on legal grounds. Instead, he spoke about something they had never considered. He spoke about love. He told them about the human capacity for adoption. Throughout their history, humans had taken in children who were not their own by blood. They had raised them, protected them, loved them as fiercely as any biological parent. Orphans became sons and daughters. Strangers became family. This was not unusual among humans. It was celebrated. He explained that humans did not believe blood was necessary for family. They believed that love was enough. They believed that the act of caring for a child, of staying through the hard times, of putting someone else's needs above your own, that was what made a parent. He told them about Sophie. He told them about the accident that took his family and the years of emptiness that followed. He told them how he had closed off his heart because he could not bear to lose anyone else. And then he told them about. He described finding her in that collapsed shelter, terrified and alone. He described the slow process of earning her trust. He described the moment she first spoke to him, the meals they shared, the nightmares he chased away. He described how she had called him protector father and how that word had changed everything. He said that had saved him as much as he had saved her. She had reminded him that love was worth the risk of loss. She had given him a reason to hope again. She had become his daughter in every way that mattered. He looked at the judges and asked them a simple question. Does the law exist to protect children, or does it exist to separate them from the people who love them? The chamber was silent when he finished. Several of the judges exchanged glances. One of them, an elderly female with kind eyes, wiped at her face with her sleeve. As rose again. She argued that human emotions were volatile and unpredictable. She warned that might eventually prioritize his own species over. She said that good feelings today did not guarantee good parenting tomorrow. Then it was time for her to speak. She presented medical evidence showing psychological state when she was rescued and her condition now. The numbers were clear. Under institutional care projections would have required years of therapy with uncertain outcomes. Under Daniel's care, she had recovered faster than anyone expected. The data supported what Daniel had said. Love worked, connection worked, family worked. The judges conferred quietly among themselves. Then the chief judge announced that they would hear from one more witness, herself. Guards brought her into the chamber. She looked so small standing in that massive room, surrounded by adults who would decide her fate. Her eyes found Daniel immediately, and some of the tension left her shoulders. The chief judge spoke gently to her. He asked her to tell them how she felt about Commander. He asked her what she wanted. Stood straight. Her voice trembled at first, but it grew stronger as she spoke. She told them about the nightmares that had haunted her since her parents died. She told them about the darkness inside her head that made her want to stop existing. She told them that Daniel made the nightmares go away. When she was with him, she felt safe. When she was with him, she wanted to live. She said that her biological parents had loved her completely. They had died trying to protect her. She would never forget them. But they were gone, and she was still here, and she needed someone to help her be okay again. She looked at Daniel, then back at the judges. He is already my father. I am asking you to let him stay that way. The chief judge thanked her. His voice was softer than before. He announced that the council would deliberate overnight. The decision would come tomorrow. Daniel walked to and knelt before her. She fell into his arms and he held her tightly. Around them, the chamber began to empty. Tomorrow would bring the answer. He whispered into her hair that he was proud of her. She whispered back that she loved him. Whatever happened next, they had said what needed to be said. The rest was out of their hands. The alien girl's heartfelt request, "Please be my father." Part 5. Daniel did not sleep that night. He sat in his quarters aboard the Starward Hope and watched the stars drift past his window. Somewhere on the station was probably doing the same thing. They were separated by walls and regulations, but he felt connected to her across the distance. He touched the bracelet on his wrist and hoped that she could feel it too. Morning came slowly. He dressed in his formal uniform again and made his way to the Grand Council chamber. The gallery was even more crowded than before. Word had spread further during the night. Everyone wanted to see how this unusual story would end. Was already there when he arrived. She sat in the front row of the gallery with a social worker beside her. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, but she managed a small smile when she saw him. He smiled back and took his place in the center of the chamber. The 7 judges entered and took their seats. Their faces revealed nothing. Daniel tried to read them to find some hint of what they had decided, but they gave nothing away. The chief judge called the chamber to order. He spoke in a formal tone, his words heavy with the weight of tradition. He said that the council had debated through the night. He said that opinions had been divided. He said that this case had forced them to examine beliefs they had held for generations. Ambassador Oss rose to deliver the decision. She looked at Daniel with an expression he could not interpret. Then she began to speak. She said that the council had searched thoroughly for a legal pathway to grant custody to Commander. They had examined every statute, every precedent, every regulation in family law. They had found none that allowed Anand to adopt a child. Daniel felt his heart sink. He heard make a small sound of distress behind him. He wanted to turn and look at her, to tell her it would be all right, but he could not move. Oss continued. Several council members were bowing their heads as she spoke. However, she said, and the word hung in the air like a lifeline. However, the council had found another way. She explained that in ancient times, before they had achieved space travel, their people had been divided into many clans. Wars and disasters often left children orphaned far from their home clans. In those cases, a tradition existed called spirit kinship adoption. When a child was rescued and cared for by a member of another clan, a bond could form that transcended blood. The rescuer who proved their love through action could be recognized as kin by choice rather than kin by birth. This tradition had not been used in centuries. It had been forgotten by most, but it had never been officially removed from their laws. It still existed, buried in ancient texts, waiting for someone to find it. The council had voted on whether to recognize Commander's bond with under this ancient custom. The vote had been close, but in the end, the majority had agreed. Daniel would be recognized as spirit-kin father. He would have full legal custody under law. The adoption would also be registered with the Earth Alliance, making it valid across all human territories. Was his daughter now, officially, permanently, forever? The chamber erupted into noise. Some shouted in protest, claiming that the council had twisted the law. Others cheered and applauded. Daniel heard none of it. The world had narrowed to a single point, and that point was the small blue girl who had launched herself from the gallery and was running toward him. Crashed into his arms with such force that she nearly knocked him down. He caught her and lifted her up, holding her tight against his chest. She was crying and laughing at the same time, her arms wrapped around his neck like she would never let go. He was crying too. He could feel the tears on his face, but he did not care who saw them. He had spent 8 years being strong, being composed, being the commander who never broke. Today, he was just a father holding his daughter, and that was all that mattered. The paperwork took 3 more days. There were forms to sign and records to update and officials to meet with. Daniel did it all with beside him. She refused to leave his side, and no one tried to make her. Stood as witness when the final documents were completed. She was smiling in a way Daniel had never seen before. She told him that she was proud of him. She told him that, and Sophie would be proud too. He thanked her. He meant it more than words could express. The crew of the Starward Hope gathered in the docking bay when Daniel and returned to the ship. Someone had made a banner that read "Welcome Home" in bright colors. The chief engineer had converted the storage room next to Daniel's quarters into a proper bedroom for her, complete with a window that looked out at the stars. Walked through the ship like she was seeing it for the first time. In a way, she was. Before, she had been a guest, a temporary presence on her way to somewhere else. Now she was home. That evening, Daniel and stood together at the main observation window on the bridge. The station had released them, and the ship was preparing to jump to hyperspace. A new mission was waiting for them in a distant system. New adventures, new challenges, a new life. Leaned against his side and looked up at him. She asked where they were going next. Daniel smiled and put his arm around her. He said it did not matter. As long as they were together, anywhere would be home. Was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke in a voice so soft he almost did not hear it. Dad. It was the first time she had called him that in English. The word was small, just one syllable, but it contained everything. Trust, love, family, future. Daniel looked down at his daughter. He called her by the name that felt more natural every time he said it. My daughter. The ship's engines hummed to life around them. The stars stretched into lines of light as they jumped to hyperspace, leaving Hellos Prime behind. Commander Daniel had come to this sector as a broken man, carrying grief he thought would never heal. He was leaving as a father, carrying hope he thought he would never feel again. And beside him watched the stars with wonder in her eyes. She had lost everything once. She had been alone in the dark, waiting to die. Now she had a father who loved her, a ship full of people who cared for her, and a universe of possibilities ahead. She touched the bracelet on his wrist, the one she had made for him. He touched it too. It was a small thing, woven threads on a circle of cloth, but it meant everything. It meant family. It meant forever. It meant home.